Hi, Richard Willett from Inner Hero Martial Arts and Fitness. And today I wanted to tell you a little story about a time that my dad, my cousin, and my brother John and I almost ended up at the bottom of the Missinaibi River because we were trying to jump some rapids, and how it relates to some of the troubling times we're going through right now. When I was a teenager, my dad, Jean-Guy, and my cousin Michel were fur trappers. And I guess I would have been about 14, 15. My brother John would have been 13 because we didn't have our trapping licenses ourselves yet. And one of the big things was we were trying to build our trails. It was a new trap line for us. And we were trying to do all our trails and routes through the forest in order to be able to do our job better. And one of the problems we had, though, was that, to give you an idea, this trap line was 70 miles down the last logging road. There was no roads on it, no nothing. It was pure, deep spruce bush. And, quite frankly, in the middle of winter, there's 5 feet of snow. Even in snowshoes, it's hard to go through. And not to mention that, most of the winter, it's minus 40 degrees outside. And probably January, February, it would probably be minus 50. So it was a really hard thing to be able to go and do those trails. And quite frankly, we needed those trails in the winter for us to be able to do our job. So one of the ideas that my dad and my cousin had the trap line below, just above ours, was that we'd go together and we'd make it up the Missinaibi River, which is a huge river up north that flows all the way up to the James Bay. And so that day we all went, my brother, my dad, my cousin Michel. My dad, being the most experienced of the group, who had jumped rapids, who had jumped up rapids before, was at the front of the boat. My brother John and I were each side of the boat. We were the ones that are going to be on the lookout for the big rocks and boulders. And my cousin Michel, who had the fastest reflexes and, quite frankly, the strongest of us, could move the motor faster than anybody else, so that we make sure we get it safely through the rapids. So in order to get where we had to go, there were literally 4 sets of rapids in total to get all the way up to the top of our trap line. So the plan was, again, right, 1 lookout, 1 main driver, 2 rock people on rock patrol, or looking out for the rocks. So we're headed up, went up all the way up to the first rapids. And my dad set a path, my cousin gunned the boat, and we're going, and we're talking some pretty treacherous rapids here. And this is springtime, really cold runoff water, and it was the only time we could make it through there because later in the year the water was lower. It's just pure rock. There was just no way to get it up, so we had to go at that time of the year. But that's when the water was the fastest, the coldest, the most treacherous. So we're on our way up the rapids. We're going through. My brother and I are on the side of the boat, hanging over the side of the boat, pointing out rocks. My dad indicating where we should go. My cousin, turning on a dime. At one point, we hit a point where it was just pure rock and boulders. My dad gives the signal to turn around. My cousin guns it, and I'm holding off to the side of the boat. The boat tipped all the way to the side. My brother John's arm, I could see in the water, his whole side, water flowing over him. Then my cousin had to turn the other direction to avoid another boulder. Now I'm in the water halfway through, and my brother's holding on for dear life up in the air, and we made it back down again, resetting. And I remember looking at my brother John, and he's looking at me, and we're going, whoa, this is intense. But yet we're looking at, my dad and my cousin, and they were cool as cucumbers. I just didn't understand why, but, I think even my cousin at one point said, Ricky, John, don't worry, we got this. So anyways, we do another run at it, and each time we're going up further and further, and sometimes coming back down, and we're making up further, and we're learning, right, as time goes by. My dad and my cousin were learning the right path, and we were trial and error, making up further each time. And at one point, we were almost through, and there was, again, a full wall, and my dad put his fist. My cousin stopped the boat right in place. Now, he was still giving a lot of gas because there was a fast current, but he just made it perfect. So we were standing still. We weren't moving forward. We weren't moving back, right or left. We could see the line of rocks in front of us. My dad eventually was looking a little to the right. My cousin moved a little to the left, And then finally he saw an opening and my cousin gunned it and we made it up the first rapids. And, you know, a little bit intense. There's a time there, John and I were looking at each other thinking, boy, we're going to end up, you know, at the bottom of these rapids. So anyways, we made it over the first rapids, and one of the rewards was my cousin put the boat just on a small creek on the side of the river, and we started fishing. And oh my God, the best fishing in my entire life. To this day, I've never fished that much before. The pickerel was almost literally jumping in the boat. And John and I are having the most fantastic time, and my dad and my cousin as well, you know, but, you know, this is the first time we had really seen, you know, insane, amazing fishing like this before. And at one point, my dad gets the signal, it's time to go, and my cousin, you know, says, pull the anchor, and I pull the anchor, but me and John are going, what the heck? You know, this is the best fish together. Why are you guys stopping us? And I asked my dad, and my cousin's backing up, and he's laughing, and my dad's laughing. And my dad's pointing over at the trees, and all I could see is a little blurry. And as my cousin pulled out, I realized why they were a little blurry and a little dark. There was a cloud of mosquitoes that must have been 15, 20 feet wide and 20, 30 feet high. There were so many mosquitoes, you could actually see the cloud moving slowly towards us. So he was saving us from being eaten to death. I don't know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of mosquitoes coming out of the creek in the swamp where they had been breeding. So anyway, so we're making it up, and we go again, and we go up a second set of rapids. And again, trial and error, up and down, moving, and my brother and I are really looking and focusing on rocks, and the boat is hitting rocks, and at times I heard the motor hit a couple of rocks, and finally we make it up the second rapid. And again, we stopped at another creek and did some amazing fishing. And then we did it a third time, went up a third set of rapids, and we had amazing time. This time, you know, John and I are starting to get used to it, but we're still focusing on those rocks, and we made up the third rapid. And this one, though, a little more narrow. There was only literally one path you could make it up, and we made that perfect path, that perfect channel. And then finally, we were almost at the top of our trap line, and way, way, way up the river. And it was where the Missinaibi River hit the Fire River, where the two met. And they were trying to get up the fourth rapids, but it turns out this one also had a mini waterfall. So it had, you know, maybe a dozen feet high waterfall. We tried lifting the boat, going portaging. It was just way too high, too hard to go through the bush. So we gave up, but it was okay. We were close to the end of our trap line. So we had explored all the inlets that we wanted, the small water inlets and so on. So we made it back down up to and camped there down one of the rapids. And my cousin was filleting fish. My dad was cooking it in butter. Oh my God, you know, like pickerel fresh from cool water straight to the pan and butter. Oh my God, it was mouth-watering. So the most amazing time that we had. And so one of the things I realized is that why was, you know, I'd asked why to my cousin or my dad, I can't remember which one, why the fishing was so amazing. And it turns out that, you know, in all the years we had been there, we only saw 2 people in probably 7 years make it to that point. And it was a couple that were canoeing up to the James Bay. And it's because it was a more difficult path. It was a hard place to get to, right? So there were a lot more roadblocks, a lot more problems, a lot more setbacks. And it took a lot more effort to get there. So not very many people ever went there. So as a result, our fishing was absolutely amazing. And we had a great time. But the other thing that I realized is that by the end of the trip, at the beginning, my brother and I were focused so much on the rocks and the problem. And after a while, we started realizing that, you know, the reason why my cousin and my dad were cool as cucumbers is that we were focused on problems. And yes, they identified the problems, they identified the rocks, but most of their focus was on the solution, on the direction we wanted to go and the path we wanted to take. So as a result, they weren't always as worried, first of all. And second of all, we never would have achieved our goal. We never would have made it up 3 rapids had we always just been focusing on the rocks. And the equivalent of this is a stretch of highway down in California, where huge straight highway, and there's these posts, let's say every 500 yards on the side of the road. And so it's, maybe 1% post, 99% open space. Yet on that patch of highway, an insane amount of people who run off the highway hit a post. So it doesn't make sense. Why would most people that fall off this highway, 99% open space, hit posts? Turns out that human nature, when we fall off a road, we look at and find the posts. And what we look at is what we try to drive to, and people end up driving into those posts because they start looking at them and inadvertently drive into those posts. And that's why when race car driving courses, where when you've fallen off the track, the instructor doesn't try to push your steering wheel, they push your head. And eventually when you start looking, you turn to go in that direction. And if you do it over and over again, eventually you don't need the instructor to do it for you. You fall off the track, you look, and you eventually turn in the direction that you want to go. So you build that habit yourself. So that's something that my brother and I learned that day. Was at the beginning of the trip, we were focused also just on the problems. By the end of the trip, we had learned from the people who had more experience that yes, you identify the problem, but you focus much more on the solution, and that's how you're successful. Now, how does that relate to you today? Well, quite frankly, there's we're living in some troubling times. There's so much on negative things going on in the news, and quite frankly, I've got a lot of friends that have lost their jobs in the service industry, in bars, restaurants, hairstylists. I've got friends that their restaurant businesses have been shut down. Their gyms, their martial arts schools, and even me myself, right? Because of the current pandemic that's going on, my martial arts school, and classes have been shut down temporarily for the moment. And if you look at the news, right, the focus right now is the news is making you focus on the issues going on around the world about the pandemic, and we're focusing a lot on the problem. And one of the things I had realized lately was as soon as I did that for a little bit, I had to snap myself out of it, because if I keep focusing on the problem, I'm not focused on the solution. And for me, that meant, starting online classes and Zoom classes for my students. That means taking my curriculum, putting it online so that they can, access it right now. And quite frankly, once we start it up later on, that'll be a great resource for them to use at home. So the question you have to ask yourself is, are you letting the news focus you on the problem, like the posts on the side of the road or those rocks in that river that we had ourselves? Is the news, the daily news, making you focus only on the problems? And if so, that's okay, but just realize maybe, you should be focusing a little bit more on the solution. So in your life, ask yourself, what is one solution? What's one solution area that if you focused on could really improve your life today, the next month, the next year, 3 years, whatever time frame that is? And, to focus on that. And maybe just like the race car drivers, if you go off the road for a little while, you need to remind yourself, a little bit of a reminder, and I'll try to do some reminders here on this platform so that you can think and say, hey, yeah, I'm focusing a little bit more too much on the problem. Let's focus on that solution again. So again, if you can focus, yes, identify the problem, but focus most of your efforts on the solution. And then long term, you get the results. And the second lesson in this is, again, it might be difficult for you right now. And I know it's difficult for a lot of people, right? But if you can get through this time, if you can get to the other side, and I believe it truly is for you, then the rewards, like us, the beautiful pickerel on that, plate, cooked in butter, is something that you can get yourself, right? And I don't want any messages about butter being not good for you, because, good organic grass-fed butter is fantastic. Anyways, so my point though is that there's great rewards when you go a path that's more difficult. So realize, even if your path's a little difficult today, the rewards will be fantastic. And just remember, it's okay to be looking at that problem, but try to push yourself more towards the solution and watch day by day as things start to get better for you. All right? Well, I hope you have an amazing day. And I just wanted to share that little story with you, and we'll see you in the next lesson.